everybody. This is Lisa Tomei Zonneville with Prolific Pulse. So happy to welcome Mimi Nichter today. We are going to talk about her book, Hostage. And boy, is this quite the book. It is telling the story, it's a memoir of terrorism, trauma, and resilience. It happened way back. Mimi, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm thrilled to be here, and I really appreciate you having me on your show.
Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, where you're from?
Sure. Well, I grew up in New York, in Brooklyn, before it was a cool place to live. And right now, for many years, I've been living in Tucson, Arizona. And I'm a retired professor of anthropology, of cultural anthropology, at the University of Arizona. And I've lived in many parts of the world, um, South and Southeast Asia, many years in India doing research. I've also done a lot of research in the US, but and written about it. And this book is the first personal book I've written.
Exactly. And boy, you really have traveled from a pretty young age, going out and exploring the world and this happened. How old were you when this happened?
I was 20 years old.
You were still just kind of a baby.
It was my second trip abroad. I was in college at the time. I was about to enter my senior year in college, but that earlier that year I had been on a semester abroad in London. And that's when I realized that I really loved being away from America. I loved to travel. I think even before then, from books and whatever, I just knew that I wanted to see the world. And I knew that this trip, that this book is based on, the aftermath of this trip to Israel, was something that my parents would support. And so I told them after I came home from my semester in the UK that I would really love to go to Israel and just go there for the summer. And they agreed.
That was going to be a nice little trip to Israel, and you're going to go home, and everything's going to be great, and you're going to fill your scrapbooks and move on and plan your next adventure. But the brakes got hit real hard. Tell us about what happened and what period of time this was in.
Um, well, this was 1970. It was the Labor Day weekend of 1970. So I'd been working on a kibbutz in Israel, which is a communal farm, and I was picking pears all summer and traveling around a bit and just having fun being a 20-year-old. Got on the plane. I was the last person to board, and I, got settled into my seat, and we made one stop in Frankfurt. And shortly after that, we were on our way back to New York. It was going to be, the pilot announced it was 8 hours to New York. And suddenly, a man and a woman in their 30s run down the aisle. And she's first, and he's chasing her. And I'm like, oh, what is this now? And I thought maybe they were having a fight or something like that. And then somebody in the front of the plane yelled, he's got a gun. She's got a grenade. And suddenly I felt like I was like, oh, what is this? But I still didn't have really any idea what was going on, nor did a lot of people on the plane. Now let's realize that this is 1970. It was a time way before the Twin Towers fell. It was a time before we had 24/7 news, and we didn't know much about hijacking, or especially, I think for me in the beginning, I thought, well, maybe they want the plane. They're going to take us somewhere, and they're going to bring the plane down, and we're going to have to wait a couple of hours to get another plane to fly us back to the US. And I thought, oh, that's such an inconvenience. And I mean, from today's perspective, this is truly stupid. But at that time, that's kind of how we knew. That's how we thought. We didn't know any better, really. And especially me, because I was young, I was traveling alone. I didn't know from this kind of thing. There were some people on the plane who were smarter than I, but, who were older. But that's a little bit of the background. But I just to continue for a minute, the plane, within a few minutes, um, they actually entered the cockpit. They kind of kicked at the door. The pilot opened it a little bit, and they forced themselves in. And then the woman making an announcement, she said, "We're from the." She had a thick accent. She said, "We're from the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. We're taking you to a friendly country. Do not be afraid." And then I thought, well, what kind of friendly country wants a plane, you know? And then then right after that, the plane made a very sharp turn in the air, and the bags just kind of fell into the aisle. And at that point, I turned to my neighbor and I said, who I hadn't spoken to yet, and I said, well, where do you think we're going? And he didn't really know. And then we just flew. We flew for many hours after that. And finally, about, I would say 6 hours later, again, she got on the intercom and she said, we'll be landing in Jordan soon. And I thought, wow, all these hours. We left Israel early this morning. Now it's sunset, and now we're in Jordan. And the pilot was circling and circling. My neighbor, guy sitting next to me, kind of stood up over the person who was sleeping by the aisle, by the window, and he said, "Look, I'm looking down, and there's nothing down there. It was just like there was still light to see. There's nothing down there. There's no runway. There's just desert. All I can see is desert, and there's some torches on the sand in big drums. I don't know where we are. I don't see any terminal." And then finally, the pilot says, "Prepare for a crash landing." And now, if I had been kind of feeling like this is all sort of a light was sort of pale yellow in my head about what was happening, now it's flashing red. Now I'm like, oh my God. So we kind of lean forward and clutch our feet as we're instructed to do. He brings the plane down, and then I look out the window and I see that there are like hundreds of men in khakis with their faces covered and guns over their shoulders, and they're all cheering. They're cheering that the plane has landed. They've hijacked a plane. And that's when it sinks in that this is something other than a grab for an airplane.
And it was like a selection process, so to speak. What was the deciding factor on who stayed on the plane and who was let off the plane?
Yeah, that is a very important question, Lisa, because really on we were told we would be sleeping there on the plane overnight, and which was a terrible thing when a plane is turned off. Of course, there's no electricity, there's no running water, there's no flushing toilets. And so hearing that we were going to stay on the plane overnight was beginning to be very frightening. How were we going to do that? And we sat there, and then the next day they started to call people up. They were calling actually all the passengers up, particularly women and children. There were a lot of people on the plane who were from other countries, as in all planes. There were people, they let go the Europeans. The plane had originated in India, and they let those people go. And then originally they asked for women and children to get off the plane, and I was traveling alone, young woman, so I got to sit on the plane. I was very happy for them and upset for myself. Then they made another announcement and said, okay, all women now get off the plane. And at that point, I was very hopeful that I'd get sent home, or get sent to Amman. We were about 20 miles from Amman in the middle of the desert. And what they did actually was they asked our religion as we got off the plane. And eventually they kept all the Jewish people on the plane, and they released the non-Jews.
I recall there's a port in there where you had passengers near you where they had two separate passports, and so they destroyed one passport so they would be considered, straight Americans by the other passport, and hopefully that would keep them from being held because of belief that they were actually, from the country. So, um,
Yes, there was a lot of fright from people um, who had dual passports, and that's actually what the Palestinians wanted. They wanted to find the people who were dual citizens.
mhm,
And so early on, this was just after the plane landed when two other Palestinians got on the plane and they asked for, they told us they're going to hand out landing cards. We have to fill them out with our names and things like that, our information, and also turn over our passports. And that's when these people sitting across the aisle from me took out their four passports, two each, Israeli and American, and began to snip them up. Actually, he ripped the covers off the Israeli passports and into little pieces, put them in the sort of white vomit bags that they used to have
mhm,
on planes, and then they shoved them in between the seats, and they swallowed the pieces with the ID pages. They swallowed them with water, and I I was confused. I didn't really understand what was going on. Why would they be eating their passports?
right.
But my seatmate, Bob, explained to me that if they were caught with the two passports and identified as Israeli citizens, they could be in very serious trouble. So most likely there were people doing that all over the plane.
Well, and there was some confusion, a misunderstanding as for you, because you happen to have, I believe it was a piece of a uniform or a shirt. I can't remember if it was a shirt that you were in your
Yes,
backpack that belonged to a friend. It was a gift.
yes,
That
yes. Because on the third day, because we were living on the plane then, third day, full plane, even after 40 people were taken off the plane, but there were still 100 of us, of whom 33 were children of various ages, babies, toddlers, children under 10, even children traveling alone. And at one point they took us off the plane. It was not easy to get off the plane because we were in an airport, so there was no sort of stairs. They had a pickup truck with a ladder, and everyone had to get off, and we didn't know what they were doing. And it turned out they were going through all the luggage that was in the overhead compartments. And in mine, they found an army shirt which had been given to me by a friend. Because I was 20, all my friends had been in the Israeli army. It's, mandatory conscription. And I just gotten a shirt and it was just in my bag. I didn't even think about it. It was just something I stuck in my bag at the last moment in case I got called on the flight.
Right. I thought when I was reading that, it was just a very scary feeling in reading that. I thought, oh my goodness, what is going to happen to her?
Yeah,
And
no.
yeah.
Yeah, it was, the whole thing was very scary, Lisa, of course, because of the very nature of being a hostage is that unknowing and losing control of your life, never knowing what was going to happen next.
And how long were you actually held as a hostage?
Well, overall, I was held for 21 days, but we were on the
Mhm.
plane for 6 days, and we were under direct threat to have the plane blown up because what the Palestinians wanted, and I think it's important for people to understand that, what they wanted was to have their prisoners freed. Those people who were being held in prisons, both in Europe as well as in Israel, Palestinian prisoners, they wanted them all to be released. And when that didn't happen, they threatened to wire the planes, which they did with explosives, and blow them up with the passengers on board. And I should add that there wasn't just one plane on the runway, there were three. They hijacked three planes. And the third one was hijacked because their demands, the Palestinian terrorists' demands, were not met. So they wanted to sort of up the ante. And they actually said, and I didn't know at the time, of course, most of my knowledge about what was happening was through my reading afterwards. but they actually said, there's plenty of room here in the desert for more planes. So we'll continue to do our hijacking. And also remember that at that time there was no um, metal detectors. And actually, this event was the event that caused that to be part of travel. So after this event, travel was never the same because they just walked on the plane with their guns and
Yeah.
grenades.
Yeah. If anything, I hope that there were some things learned in the security world,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
to help prevent, but yet we've had situations over the years, I mean, and so it's something that hopefully they're better about now, but it's still something that's kind of scary to me. Did you make any lifelong friendships with any of the hostages?
Um, Not originally, no, because when I came home, those were very different times too. Like now I have people's emails, and just yesterday I was emailing with somebody, and I'm just, in relation to the book, and people are reading the book now who were hostages with me. We had a reunion, which I talk about in the book, but the answer to your question is no, and that is because I never talked about this a hostage, being a hostage. And I think to for me to have had friendship, I mean, I think first of all when I came home, I just needed to be on my own, right? And I couldn't talk about this story. And partly I think there was a number of reasons why I really couldn't. I was brought up in a family where we didn't talk about personal trauma. Many, I think, women my age were socialized into silence, particularly, anything to do with our mental health. We didn't talk about that. It was inappropriate to talk about it. And I followed that pattern. And I think also the story itself was so frightening for me that I just thought I could put it aside. I also felt that people couldn't really understand what I had been through. Oh, we also need to understand that this was a time before post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD was not developed as a concept until 1980, and this was 1970 when I returned home, and so I just thought I could put it aside. So that's the reason I didn't have friends, because if I reached out to them, the only thing we could have shared was that story. I mean, I did have friends on the plane, certainly that's what
Yeah.
got me through, but it didn't carry over into my, sort of life afterwards.
I just would think that it possibly, like PTSD does, it could enter into somebody's like their muscle memory as a reaction of what it may have happened years ago. Something might trigger that um, but with complication of PTSD, it's sometimes unpredictable as to what can happen with that, and how it's going to.
Absolutely. I mean, I think um, afterwards, when within a year, I started to travel again, and I had many triggers. I had triggers being in North Africa, in other Arab countries. I had triggers by small things like seeing kafiyas on people's head and hearing language. Just that very embedded fear. I mean, it wasn't something that would stop me, but it was something that I felt. And then I think, more than that, when international events occurred, like for example, 2 years after our hijacking, there was Entebbe. No, not Entebbe was a little few years after that, but there was the Munich Olympics. The Munich Olympics, the same Palestinian group entered the Olympics, entered the residence, and killed several Israeli athletes. And anytime anything happened like that, and there have been many since my hijacking, of course it triggered. I felt like the seeds of the trauma were there, and so I would follow it. I would follow it. I would follow it with interest, and know that so much could happen to these people, as well as how lucky we were that we didn't get killed.
Exactly. What is the turning point that caused you to decide to write this?
Hmm. Um, well, I think the world has changed greatly. We now talk about trauma, we talk about mental health openly, and I felt that a lot of people are living with the same sort of hidden stories, hidden fears, hidden traumas that I have been, and that it's very important to share our stories because they help us and they open us up. And I felt that I needed to tell the story. Um, a few things happened. As a researcher, I built my own career based on interviewing others and talking to them about sensitive issues, not terrorism, but issues like body image and more recently social media and how that affects how they feel about themselves. And my whole research was predicated on the idea that people would really talk about themselves openly. And they did. And then when I was called upon by a fellow researcher to talk about this story, there were instances where I said, no, I can't. And then instances when I, did do one interview, which made me realize that the seeds of this trauma were inside me because it was very frightening for me to open it up. Like when you've put something aside for a long time, it sort of has a prominent place even though you're not aware of it. And so but I think the main thing was that our American culture, perhaps global culture, has really changed in the sense of our understanding the need to address our mental health and talk about that and share it.
That would be a good takeaway, I think, from the book is the importance of addressing mental health issues, no matter how many years it takes to get to that point.
Yeah.
And I think, if I remember correctly, this book was kind of developed and written, worked during the time of the pandemic and
Yes.
and a post-retirement period. So you kind of had a pandemic book baby out of the situation.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think I needed to get that time and space available to myself because it's one thing to want to do something like want to write. It's quite another thing to actually sit down and begin to delve through the story of what had happened. And then, too, with the detail, it's one thing to remember what had happened, like, oh, these people took us off the plane, they went through our luggage, they interrogated me at gunpoint, they did all these things. Those big things I could remember. But the feelings that went along with it, that's what's that's what had was harder for me to access. And so I felt like the pandemic was a time when, because I couldn't go out a lot, couldn't have the same kind of life that we all had, right?
Yeah.
I was inside, and so I literally journeyed inside to look at this aspect of my life, which I knew would be difficult because when you haven't talked about something for a long time, I mean, how do you even begin to access it? So,
Did you record like in a journal or any kind of notes over the years to you remember these things?
yes, when I first came home, um, I had written a journal, and I wrote a journal when I first first came home. Of course, I couldn't write anything. I didn't come home with anything, so I couldn't write anything while we were hostages. But I did write when I came home, and I wrote when I went back to college because I felt very uncomfortable there. My friends couldn't understand what I had gone through, and in fact, I mean that's the whole thing about being a hostage. I think so much of it is you're misunderstood. Nobody is looking at you as a person. You're sort of an other. Very difficult situation to be in. And I had notes. I had journals. I had written at certain different points in my life. I'd written, sort of 50 pages of a story, of my memories, particularly being on the plane. Um, And then how I reconstructed the book was I just decided, at least in the beginning, I did it day by day. So I kind of, first it was very bare, like what I had journal notes for, I could put in those days. And then I referred to the newspapers that, it had been front page news. That was carried in global, magazines as well. And I found that just the small details of what had been written about the story were really triggers for me, really opened up the memory. Like, for example, I read in one newspaper article that someone was being interviewed after she had been released, and she just talked about laughing with her seatmate about the food. And I realized, oh, yeah. And this whole image opened up to me about laughing with not my seatmate, but a friend that I made on the plane who I moved next to and sat next to, and how he joked about taking the tea out to the wing of the plane and heating it up for me because it was cold and I didn't like cold tea. Or how if he had raw eggs, he would jump on the wing and cook me an omelet. And it was these absurd things as hostages, but yet they were funny and they made me laugh. And I had forgotten these little, vignettes. And so they came back to me. The other thing that really helped also was seeing the pictures because I didn't realize certainly that there were journalists, but there were some journalists on the runway, not many, or not, there was no runway on the sand. But there were there were pictures, and those pictures also opened up tremendous memories for me because I had those images in my head. Like I had the image of they blew up the planes. I had that image in my head, but then seeing the Palestinians on top of the ashes of those blown up airplanes, and seeing them sort of cheering with their guns in their explosive happiness, was just something that I knew I could expand into the moment. So there it was I was surprised at how much I could remember. And I didn't want the interesting thing I think, Lisa, is even though I'm a professional interviewer and I've written, all my books are based on interviews. And all my writing basically is based on interviews and analysis of those interviews. I didn't want to interview anybody for this book because I didn't want to be influenced. And I felt like the whole thing was really about my memory. It wasn't somebody else's memory. So now, when you ask me about friends, got an email yesterday from a fellow hostage who was 10 at the time. And he said he just finished the book in the snow, it being inside for 2 days in New York with the snowstorm. Perfect time to read. And so he'd finished the book, and he said, I'm so thankful that this reminds me of so much. So every time I have gotten some responses from fellow hostages who have now read the book. And, because I worried that, am I getting it right? Because we all have different memories. We all see things differently. And when I get that confirmation, I'm very happy.
Sounds to me like this is like a CBS Sunday morning interview waiting to happen.
Well, Lisa, let's hope for that.
That's our mouths to God's ears, right? Um, yeah, it's really cool that the people that were involved in going through this as well have read this and have given you such great feedback on it. When is the actual release date?
The release date is March 1, so it's
March
coming right
1st.
up.
Next week.
It is, but the funny thing is, it's already shipping out. Amazon's been sending it out for about a week, and my press has probably been sending it out for 2 weeks. So I don't know. I think that's maybe happening with other books as well now, and I don't really.
Yeah. As soon as they're able to print and get them out there, people want it,
People
so
want it. They don't let you review it yet
yeah,
until the pub date.
I'll be sure to get a review in for it.
Oh,
So,
thank you, Lisa.
excellent book. Congratulations on getting it done. Are there any questions I haven't asked you that you'd like to bring up, or anything that you'd like to offer?
Um, well, Yes, just one, I think. What do I
Mhm.
want people to take away
Okay.
when they read the book? And I think, a lot of people are very interested in what a hostage is, what it means to be a hostage. And I don't feel that there's that many books written by hostages. Clearly, there's some, and there's more coming, especially since the Gaza incident. But, just I wanted, that loss of your identity, the othering, the loss of who you are as a person. And I think you don't have to be a hostage in a political situation to understand or to take something away from this book, because I think many of us are hostages. We're hostages to, we're emotional hostages. We're based in the past, can't move into the future. We're in situations that hold us back. And one thing I have felt since writing the book is how much I've kind of expanded and come out more in the world. Because I think we, um, when we limit ourselves in terms of what we're ready to, talk about or share, I think we're really limiting not just our ability to tell that particular story, but in our own personal lives, we have limited our ability to really feel widely. Right? I don't think you can squirrel something away and not address it. And I think a lot of people are living with that, particularly older people like myself who really grew up in a time when it was culturally inappropriate to talk about things. And so I thought it was time now to tell this story. And also, we're losing our stories.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know anything about this. And this really was the first incident of international terrorism, and it
Right.
was the biggest event in aviation history,
Mhm.
or one of the biggest events, I should say. Um, and I think also we have more resources than we think we do. We're capable of much more. We don't know what we can, how much maybe courage we have, how much resilience we have until we're faced with a situation where we have to show it.
I think that when people read this, it might actually bring up some memories of something that they might want to tell their story about. And
Yeah.
I do believe in the power of telling your story and what a difference it can make. If one life is touched by this book, it's
Yes.
already met its goal in my mind. But I have a feeling that many lives are going to be affected by this book. I wish you the best of this, and that as you go out on your presentations or whatever you're going to do in your publicity run,
Mm.
that people will, just take this book off the shelves, because it's definitely one to be watching for and to read. Hostage. Thank you so much, Mimi.
Thank you so much,
It's
Lisa, for
been a
talking to me.
pleasure.
Thank you. It's been great to talk to you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.